Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Conversations from the Classroom. Today I am here with Miriam McCabe and Alan Hynes to talk about the notion of partnership as it exists within education in Ireland, and particularly within the Catholic education within an Irish context. Miriam McCabe currently works with CPSMA and is a doctoral candidate in DCU in the Institute of Education. And Alan Hynes is the CEO of Senans Centre for Education in the west of Ireland, where he tackles day-to-day issues on on an ongoing basis, toughly but fairly as it unfolds. But I'm going to pass you over to them to make their real introductions about what they do and where they're based in Irish education. So I'll begin with Alan.
Sure. I suppose I'll start by relocating myself to the southwest.
Oh.
So I'm the director of St. Senan's Education Office. So we're located in Limerick, but we serve four dioceses for Catholic schools in four dioceses: Castlemaine, Limerick, Kerry, and Killaloe. So basically the counties of Kerry, Clare, Tipperary, and Limerick. So about 518 schools that my office looks after. We act on behalf of the four Catholic patrons within that area and carry out the roles and responsibilities of the patrons under the Education Act, as well as assisting schools with general advice and support as and when appropriate. And I've been there since June of last year, and before that I was a colleague of Miriam's in CPSMA as an education advisor. So I've been involved in education just since 2016. Before that, I had a stint in politics, and before that in business, which would have involved a lot of HR work, which is probably where I came into to CPSMA in terms of a mixture of HR and politics.
Brilliant stuff. I just even flagged there's an awful lot of terms that were thrown there. Was it just around willy-nilly? Was it? So we'll just even clarify for the students what a diocese is. Was it So a diocese basically is actually, Alan, do you want to define for them?
Yeah, no,
what
it's a territorial unit essentially within the church. So the Catholic Church arranges itself into territorial units called dioceses. Each diocese has its own bishop. So they're the basic fundamental units of the church. Even that phrase, the church, is complicated because what that might mean is always difficult. I mean, in a sense, there is a Church of Limerick and a Church of Castlemaine headed by its own bishop. And those bishops then are in communion with each other through essentially a common link with the Pope. But so in essence, anyway, the diocese is a defined territorial unit. And
so just we can clarify that, just even in the sense of that there's an area, a community within the church, within the institutional church, as to say, the head of it being the bishop. Each bishop is a law unto their own, and through a spirit of working together in collegiality and solidarity, as being part of the universal church, the global church, the Roman Catholic Church, global church, and particularly within Ireland, they work together to try and achieve some kind of unity of decision or uniformity in how the church lives and carries out its mission in a locality. And in that sense, then the schools are very much a part of that, aren't they? They're at the heart of the diocese, and the bishop is usually in our primary schools the patron. Yeah. We'll unpack all that a bit further.
We'll unpack on that as we get in, but I think it is
a bit further.
Yeah, I'll let Miriam maybe make her introduction first before we get
introductions first. We go into the.
But it is relevant in terms of how the whole thing hangs together in terms of partnership. A lot of what you and I have just said in terms of terms and unpacking those terms will have a lot to say about partnership. But I'll let my former colleague and still friend Miriam make her introductions before we hog the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, first and foremost, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching since 1992, so I'm old, and I have been a principal for 14 years, a teaching principal, in fact, 14 years before going on secondment to CPSMA, which is the management body for primary schools. So you can imagine, I had a busy time as a teaching principal, but working with CPSMA, and I'm in my 5th year on secondment, I worked, as Alan said, as an education advisor. And I work with principals and chairpersons, primarily principals, as an advisor on everything and anything that they, meet in their daily work life. So we help out with management issues, HR issues, or just anything that comes up from day to day, dealing with parents, dealing with difficult students, interacting with the different agencies. So all of that different, the problems and issues that arise for principals on a daily basis. And as an education advisor, we're assigned to dioceses, bringing in that diocese term again. And my diocese would be from Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and depending on who's in or not in the office on any day, we could be talking to anyone from anywhere around the country. And yeah, it's very interesting. You definitely get a bird's eye view on what's going on in schools at this time, and you get a feel for what's happening on the ground, as they say.
Definitely.
Brilliant, that's great. And just a flag there, like, was it because we do even casually when we're speaking, and because there's so many Catholic primary schools, we do just kind of say, like, even like CPSMA, we go as the management body for primary schools, because we have it off the top of our head because there's so many Catholic, but it's specifically the Catholic Primary Schools Managerial Association, isn't it? It's the management body specifically for Catholic schools. Just we have 90% of schools that are Catholic, so there basically is all schools. Which I flag with the students all the time. Like, look, basically is nearly all schools as it in the Republic at primary.
It is important to point out that there are members of CPSMA who are not Catholic schools. So many special schools are members of CPSMA, as well as some of the Church of Ireland or other Protestant denomination schools. And CPSMA has given assistance. I was just teeing that up though, into the sense that that's actually falls under the notion of partnership and collegiality, is in that the organization itself is established as a Catholic organization, but by virtue of working together and trying to offer some kind of consistency in educational management, that they incorporate and they engage with other school types, let's say. I suppose I'll be tying it up that way. So that would have been, let's say, the platform, Alan, you'd bet us to it, isn't the platform we're going to reach out to it. But yeah, no, there are all these stakeholders there, but it's just to try and get, I suppose, for students, the idea, first off, because we're all very much aware of the dynamic, because we're in it all the time. 99% of the things we've just spoken about already, no student in the class will have heard. Right, so it's just to get that in, so we're going to try and build this up for them from the start. Let's start from each of the structures as they emerge, and then how do we all relate and how do we all get on with our business? Does that sound good? Yep, perfect.
Yeah, brilliant. So I suppose just even on that sense, then we're lobbying around the word partnership already a good bit. In your day to day, how does partnership, is it actually at the heart of things, or is it just some lovely notion that we kind of have? Is it actually a real thing?
Well, I suppose I can start from the fact that as a teacher and as a principal, I know my school couldn't exist without partnership on that very micro level. If we'd start even there at the very center where the action all takes place in the classroom, in the school, I know that there's, schools, you hear about the underfunding in schools, you hear about the difficulties, you hear about the workload that teachers and principals, you hear about all these new initiatives being thrown at schools and schools making the best that they can of them. They do that because we work together. I would say, for example, when I'm in my own school, we work as a team, and each member of the team has equal value, and each member of the team have a voice. And I think that's terribly important because, I suppose, to jump in and use that term goodwill straight away, my school succeeded because of the goodwill that was there. My school succeeded because teachers were prepared to go above and beyond that 9 to 3. They would be there in the evenings. They were, even simple things like football training, choir practice, practice for a Christmas play, first communion, whatever it was, the staff were up for it. They were prepared to get stuck in and do whatever it took. If it was, doing the school garden, it didn't matter. So at that very micro level in schools, you have people who work together and with a common goal to making the school the best that they can, to doing the best that they can for the students that they have in front of them. So I suppose if we, that's the start, that's the beginning from my perspective.
And even that and Miriam is speaking from the ground up. I've never stood in a classroom, but even just so somebody who comes in from, let's say, a business background or a political background, and looking into schools, just what Miriam's talking about there, it is incredible the amount of day-to-day goodwill that schools rely on to do what they do. Like, incredible. And the partnership between parents and the school, even in terms of okay, the day-to-day cooperations, but fundraising is immensely important for schools because the state underfunds the primary school sector in particular, and principals and parents associations are forced to do a phenomenal amount of fundraising to keep it going. Within the school, though, and this is often a surprise for people when they come into the sector, for instance, there is no contract of employment for permanent teachers or for principals. Okay, so the duties of teachers and principals are not defined in detail anywhere. They are suggested and referenced and can be cobbled together from various different documents like the rules of national schools, hundreds of written circulars, and pieces of legislation. But there's an awful lot unsaid as well, a huge amount unsaid. And into that grey area that is ill-defined, that's where all the goodwill is necessary, with the principal and teachers working together. And similarly then, SNAs, ancillary staff, absolutely critical to the running schools, all of them generally working beyond what is strictly defined in any kind of sense as their contract duties. And the whole thing hangs together with that enormous amount of goodwill that exists within classrooms and then between the principal and the rest of our teaching and non-teaching staff. And it is when we,
Sorry, Alan, and you mentioned parents. I just recently was back visiting the school, my own school as I refer to it, with somebody a colleague who'd not been there before, and they admired flower tubs outside the door. I said, oh yes, a parent takes them away twice a year, fills them up and puts seasonal flowers in them. He remarked on something as, oh yes, a parent did that or bought that or put up that sign or painted this or painted that. So you see, within a school, there's an awful lot of that happens where people like to give back to the school. They like to come in and they like to help, but it's about it, there's an appreciation on the side of the school that actually happens. And then of course, as a teaching principal, you're delighted with any help you get because it is a very, very onerous task to do on your own. It's impossible to do on your own, in fact, a teaching principal. But then we look to our boards of management. I mean, they're voluntary. I mean, just think about that. They're managing a school and they're voluntary. There are only 2 people on an 8-member, for the most part, an 8-member board of management who are actually employed by the school. All of the other members, including the chairperson, are voluntary. And you would have 2 parents, 2 wider community, and then 2 patrons representatives, all voluntary.
I think the figure I used in the lectures was 18,400 or 600 or something, I think, was it, for the number of volunteers working on board of management in the country. Now that figure could be off. I'll admit, I'll throw my hands up in the air.
Even a rough calculation of, let's say there's over 3,000 schools, but even taking 3,000 by 8, like you're already at 24,000 volunteers. And that's right, just.
So I may amend that. So I may amend that in my lecture. So I may get that figure.
Yeah.
But I suppose could I just, before we go any further, could I just bring it back, just because we've gone up to board of management, just to get, I think, like, Justin, this is just my perspective on the idea of partnership, and it's kind of real origin part with me in the school is back to, like, you hit it really well, Miriam, was on the parent part, because it all comes back to the fact of why schools exist in the first place. Parents constitutionally are the primary educators of their children. Schools exist to assist parents in the education. So immediately from the get-go, the school isn't the leader, even though whatever way that might go on, let's say, I know, but let's say in practice, and the school is there and the teachers are there to assist those parents in educating their children. So immediately we're off to immediately education from the get-go is a partnership. And even between the child and the parent. So that's a relationship, and there's a partnership happening there. So immediately we have from that get-go. And that's why I think even, like, you see the flowers and that, parents want to do stuff. Let's say, like, when their kids are getting, parents want to get involved in the education. It's such a bit, like, your kids are gone such a large part of the day at school. And the schools are giving so much to your children. Parents that want to give back as well. And I kind of flagged it in the seminar. You'll see it this week. Was it in seminar material? Students, you'll see it. I kind of talk about divestment, and the problem with divestment a lot of time is the enmeshment of identities in the local school community, is in that the school is so much a part of their lives, and the school is very much that the lines become a little bit blurred and enmeshed around, this is our school, our identity, our school. So when you're on about changing anything to do with that school, people can be very resistant to that change, and I think it comes back from that very principle at the beginning, so that relationship that's there between the school. Sorry, I just said I thought it was important we catch it when we talk about parents. It was really good. I thought we could get it in.
It's just like I that's why I kind of stalled when I said my school, because I don't see it as my school. It was just how I was identifying it to a colleague at the time. But
it shows a really clear thing, though, Miriam, like how much that school is a part of you.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not even that you own the school; it's that you take such a pride in your school.
An ownership thing. I feel how would you say, a connection with the school that is more than just a job, and that is something that you will see with the staff in my school and many schools that I speak to, where they have a pride in their school. It is more than just a job. And then we talk about parents. I mean, let's face it, the best outcomes you can get for any child, and remember, that's why we're there. It's for the best outcomes for any child, is when you work in close partnership with the parent, when you can establish those relationships, when there's a two-way communication, when everyone is on the same page about what's the best for the child, you have the best outcomes for that child. We're all heading in the same direction.
No, I like, just to touch and get back to what Dave was talking about there. It is important to realise that the fundamental makeup, the legal framework within schools exists in Ireland, and the philosophy that underpins it, well, for starters, is actually fundamentally Catholic. So the church and state are in violent agreement in the parent being the prime educator, and that's something the church has said for centuries, that the parent is the primary educator of their child. So that's been the church's consistent position for a very long time. The Irish state embedded that in the constitution as well. Articles 42 and 44 being the most relevant in terms of schools. But also fundamentally, it's a principle of subsidiarity, which is critical in Catholic thought. And we touched on it there, we were talking about dioceses, and each diocese having its own bishop and being its own authority. And even within dioceses, within the church's own law, canon law, a parish priest, in a sense, is his own little mini pope as well within his parish, because each parish, the smaller units within the diocese, also have rights. Now, why was this relevant to schools? The fundamental shape, just finish this one because it's go on. No, go on.
It's just would you just clarify for students what you mean by the term subsidiarity?
Well, subsidiarity is basically it's the principle. This is what I suppose the church has it, and the state has it in terms of education, is that authority is always exercised at the lowest appropriate level. So if a decision can be taken at a particular level, it should be at the lowest level it's capable of being taken, and should only be advanced up if higher levels of authority are needed to carry out the task. So in other words, power should always be as local as possible, essentially is what it means. That power should be, it's an anti-centralization of power. So it should be pushed out to the peripheries as much as possible.
So it kind of works against micromanagement nearly, isn't it? It kind of works against micromanagement.
Yes. So we don't, even though we live actually in a very centralized state, the Irish state is a curiously centralized model. So the central government in Ireland is far more powerful than any every other European country, with very weak local government. But in our schools, the model is very different. So each of our schools is managed by a local board of management. And typically those 8 members that Miriam talked about, again, volunteers. And even though 2 of them are paid members of staff of the school, the principal and the teacher nominee, both of them actually serve on the board in a voluntary capacity, in the sense that there's no extra money for sitting on the board. So you have these local boards that are made up of people drawn from the community, parents, community nominees. The patron nominees as well are typically local. So it's a local board managing a local school, answerable to a local patron. So the bishop himself is very local to the school, because obviously lives in the diocese. So you have and I think that is sometimes lost in, let's say, talk about reform in Irish education or what it might mean. And David mentioned divestment. And again, what replaces that structure is always a question that's never really discussed in terms of the divestment debate. But currently that's the model. We have local schools being managed by local boards, answerable to local patron. And just to give that, essentially when I'm training boards of management, this is what I say in terms of legal framework. Boards of management, manage a school on behalf of the patron, under regulations laid down by the Minister for Education, and they manage it for the families, for parents. The school is managed for parents to allow them to carry out their duty to educate their children. That's the framework. So the schools are there to actually assist parents in their role as a primary educator. They have to do it according to regulations laid down with the minister, and they do it basically on behalf of the patron. So, and the patron then has the function of defining the characteristic, spirit, stroke, that great word, ethos, that no one really knows what it means, of a school. Yeah. So.
Well, so, but we do know what it means. Well,
people always allege they don't know what it means.
But I suppose I think just even there, and like, what screams out the whole thing? It's a necessity nearly that schools are managed in this way, like in its origin, how they emerged organically in this way, because of how unique all schools are, isn't it, Miriam?
Yeah.
Like every school is like so different. Like even when it comes to an issue like inclusion, even like every situation and context is so utterly unique and different that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all model. And I think that's what you're even getting at there. And there is a nervousness around divestment to even ATB style, like even models, with the fear of becoming, like, I think the term we often use as a HSE of education, where there's just numerous executives, going through the system, and it's that kind of and that's just throwing lobbing it out there to very fun.
It is, but because
casually,
schools, but the schools because they're embedded in their communities. You'll have here in the parish I live in, which is Corrafin in County Galway. So the schools are fundamentally a part of the football machine of the parish of Corrafin, which So the schools are almost embedded in that great parish endeavour, which is to produce All Ireland winning club football, right? So that's almost the entire purpose of the year anyway. Not this year, but anyway, not this year. But it's very part of. So they're embedded in the local area in that sense. If you go down to where David is, Kilkenny, do you know what I mean? The school system is a full part of Kilkenny's quest to produce like the perfect hurler.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, I don't know if Miriam in Meath or Cavan.
Yes, what, Alan? What about Miriam in Meath or Cavan?
But
it still is. Yeah. It's still embedded in Cavan. Like, I know myself, it's there. And Kilmore wasn't even talking. It's still like the big conversation was even that evening was that football training was on at 7 and our meeting was on at 8. So that we were having that evening with people from the school. Like, so like we're still part and parcel with that whole big machine. Like, but even just before we move the conversation further again, just to flag now, we're after naming enough. Like, we're in the general conversation. Like, so we're after talking about parents, we're after talking about schools. We're after talking about boards of management. We're after talking about the department. We're after talking about the state. We're after talking about GA. All of these things we haven't even mentioned TUSLA or we mentioned the HSE. We've mentioned CPSMA. We've mentioned St. Senans. So as we go on, we're constantly accumulating all of these different bodies as we're talking here now, and all of these are all in relationship with each other. So just even, sorry, Miriam, if you want to continue on from where you were thinking there. Sorry if I didn't make you lose your trail of thought.
Not at all. It was just linking on to what Alan actually had said about that whole piece of community and culture and where a community, where the school is within all of that. I mean, you just have to look at any of the celebrations that occur in a school calendar, and I'm not talking even about the sacramental pieces, which are beautiful and, to be celebrated in themselves. But for example, now, obviously with COVID, it's not happening, but every single year, one of the highlights of Christmas around in our area is where the church, there's standing room only in the church, because our church allows all of the children in the school to come in, clear off the altar and do a Christmas play. And it isn't your traditional, nativity. It's actually, it could be, something a little bit different with some music that's quite different and some dancing quite different, but it has a message. But it has become part of the local, no more than the football match or the final, if they're in. This is an annual piece that this year is very much being mourned because it can't happen this year because of COVID. And it's just somewhere where the children and the parents and the grandparents and the aunts and uncles and older brothers and sisters, everybody comes together to celebrate, what they're doing in the school. And it's a beautiful thing to see, really,
And like what's beautiful about that example there, Miriam, is that you've kind of hit all the three stools, like the home, school, and parish, for something that isn't just about the sacraments.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? And like there's a reason why like you find an awful lot of primary schools, like I know even my own primary school, like in Ballycallan, I was like, the primary school is directly adjacent to the church, so where it was built even, right?
Right.
And like there's like, yeah, it's right front and near right beside the church. Like, and I think it's all about, I think, in my own, like, and especially when you think, is that enmeshment of identities, and like within a community, that schools are like, what we talk about them like they're this kind of, sometimes we talk about them like these very structured, cold, four wall buildings. They couldn't be anything further from it. It's like it's actually, there's an awful lot of parallels between a very cold reading of schools like that and a cold reading of church. So church like four walls there, rather than it's the community
Mm.
and it's the people with all their uniqueness and individuality that make a school what it is.
You witness that on a daily basis, when nowadays, people almost don't have time to meet and talk and interact. Whereas first thing in the morning, you'll see parents standing outside having a chat. They're interacting.
Yeah.
There's a sense of community outside the gate of the school just as much as it is inside the gate of the school. And it's lovely to see.
And just if you're a recent example in Limerick, you had a lot of the obviously deprived or areas of high deprivation in Limerick City, but the schools right throughout the lockdown and right throughout the summer break, teachers were in and working with local clubs, so local rugby clubs, local GA clubs, local youth associations, arts groups got involved as well with schools. There was a massive effort to get weekly care packages basically out to families. So these, yes, were food, but also arts and crafts supplies and just other resources, right from within days of the lockdown occurring in March. These systems had come together, right? Communities had come together, schools very much a part of it. And homeschool liaison officers really earned their money and everything else at that time. But it was a whole school effort. You're teaching and non-teaching staff in, principals in, and it was this massive effort that went on right through the summer. It was incredible to see it. And again, it was a full partnership approach. So in Limerick, obviously, rugby clubs played a big part. Scout groups were there as well. So, but as I said, the arts sector got involved as well, and with a lot of resource being put. So it is interesting seeing how embedded, and I'm glad we started, because sometimes you talk about partnership education, you start with the department, the managing bodies, the trade unions, the statutory authorities like TUSLA. Whereas I'm glad we started actually where we should be starting, which is at the more important level, which is actually with the flesh and blood people on the ground.
Well, we took a Catholic approach, Alan. That's what it was. We took a Catholic approach to the whole thing, and that's what it is, and that's the point,
Yeah.
Realistic piece. I mean, talk about, I would engage with, say, the NCCA as part of my work. I would go to the primary board where they're developing curriculum and they have all this research and all this high thinking and this overarching perspective. Whereas I'm constantly, I feel like a broken record. I'm saying, well, what about the practitioner on the ground? Have we engaged? Have we consulted? And there isn't enough of that, because at the end of the day, they can have all this lovely change and this research backing up all of this change. But if the practitioner on the ground can't see any value in it, or can't see any sense in what they're doing, why change it for the sake of changing if ultimately what the practitioner has learned from the people in front of them, the children, that this is what they need, this, my assessment as a professional, that this is what these children need. And, I've engaged with their parents, and I've engaged with maybe some of the outside agencies, HSE, TUSLA, occupational therapists, NEP psychologists, whoever, if you have a child who has particular needs. And, who's to say that teacher doesn't know exactly what they're talking about?
And you see, that's the thing, we have to be careful that we don't get lost in the realm of thought experiments.
Yeah.
And in the sense of, like, I always say to the students up there as well, like up in DCU, like, that we tend to deal a lot in this space, in the university space, when we're teaching teachers, with the perfect realities. So even the perfect wrong situation. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you get me, like, even when something's wrong, it's still the perfect wrong situation that we try to work out, rather than some things are just, they're living things, like they're living communities, because things are going to happen that can't be planned for. Absolutely. But the perspective of the teacher on the ground is so utterly important to the development of policy, the development of curricula, and the development of teaching practice. And like, even I'll just even flag it, even the idea of school placement. Like we do with the students are going to, like, the sheer amount of goodwill, like schools don't have to take students. Like, even that's, so, like, just so you know, students, like, when you go out in school placement, the school doesn't have to have you there. There's no legal basis, or they're not obliged to have you there. They have you there to
difficulty there with parents
Mm.
who don't like the idea, and the school are
Mm.
championing the kind of student, and this is necessary and for future teachers, etc., etc. But it's not always an easy piece for the school to manage.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And see, but again, we're all like a phrase that we don't hear a lot, in anymore, really, which we should, is the idea of the common good. And that's that contribution to the school, to the common good. And like what we supposed just not to get too highfalutin, but like we need to remember that even like when it comes to European philosophy, let's say, and even like our understanding of the relationship, or ethos, I suppose, of Europe is very, very much embedded and has an awful lot indebted to Catholicism and Christianity. And even within that space, an awful lot of the way in which we go about our business, like an obvious flag, even like Christianity is so embedded within Ireland that even like when we say Diagwit, we're saying God be with you. So Dia Smurgwit, God and Mary with you. So these things just are embedded in our culture and embedded in part of our very being. So the way in which we can often have our school structures, our state structures, implicitly have a very strong, and it's kind of I suppose the only example I could give is like the Palmer example. You teach who you are, but like we build what we are, in a way, as a people as well. So like we can, and that's back against that idea, we only make things as people, as human beings we don't create. That kind of idea, because we always make from something. We're always making something from what exists, and that can be very much our making from our perspectives, our identities, as well as thoughts and ideas and everything. But I think when we come into the school, it's a wonderful marriage and a wonderful, I suppose, manifestation of all those partnership relationships. And like when we talk about the effective running of a school, or effective, we're all back to those key tenements of all relationships, like good communication, flexibility, empathy. And like that's a big thing. I always think back, Alan, on an example you told me about before. That was a really interesting use of the word ethos. Because again, just to flag, because we tend to talk about like it's an abstract thing, but it was about I think it was an issue or something. It was like with a student with difficulty, and the principal was talking about, well, where does the token of mercy come in here?
Yeah.
So that's again using the Catholic ethos of a school in a very practical way, because that's the way it is. Because religion is a lived thing; it's not an idea; it's a lived reality. And it's the same thing when it comes to being a Catholic school. But then when you move that up through the ranks, even like we flagged at the start of this conversation that we said CPSMA, right? Let's say I said it's a Catholic body, but it has non-Catholic, it deals with non-Catholic, so like special education needs, etc. and all this. Again, that's about partnership, isn't it, guys? Like it's about this collegiality that within education. Let's make this system work, and let's get on with our business. And how can we assist each other in carrying out the education of kids for the purpose of parents? And that's parents educating their children. Again, it sounds like a lovely woolly idea, but it very much is, isn't it? Like it's part of it is part of the fabric of everything. Like so, like even in that, like when Miriam was talking about consultation, like have parents, have been teachers been consulted. It's like even that, like the NCCA, like it's a death sentence. Like if they went off and just created a program, which some of us could say that they do, just go off and get it wrong, but they can go off and create a program, and they can release it to schools, but it will fall deadpan and sit on the shelf, and it won't work. The idea of not piloting a program, the idea of not engaging all stakeholders in education before releasing something out into the education space, is so incomprehensible today, because of the lessons of the past, because everybody has some role to play, and it creates so much issues down the line if you don't have effective consultation. So even the NCCA need to consult everybody when developing the program. The department also have their ears on the ground as regards everything through the department, even inspectors reports and evaluations. But there is that unique space as well, even between ethos, let's say, isn't there? Like and the department, even like listen, the department kind of leave that space to the patron, and they're left to look at. They're giving them the responsibility of looking after that aspect of the school, and there's that respect, let's say, that happens in that space there as well. Which again you could flag as being an issue even in the NCCA document. I've seen that for the primary school curriculum into the future, the idea of state intervention around the assessment of religious education, which again is pricking up about the relationships and the different roles and bodies. And believe me, you need a whole new glossary and alphabet to get all the abbreviations and acronyms under your belt. By no means are we saying that by the end of this conversation should you. But I think from this chat, I'd be hoping that, if you get out and about, is that every part of education is in relationship, and that comes down. The big decisions have an impact to the student at the desk and the teacher at the desk, and then by having that impact there, it has the impact on the family at home.
Yeah.
And so and in that, if it has an impact on the family at home, and then between the school type and everything, it's going to impact the parish, it's the community, because it's going to be a community issue then. So I think that kind of idea of partnership, I'm really happy that we kind of did start from that perspective, from the ground up rather from the top down, and I think you're right. But is there anything else, guys, like is there anything else you'd like to say or add, like about even like, the types of bodies?
Well, just your mention there about personal relationships, like they are in terms of what Miriam's doing in CPSMA, but for myself, let's say, so I act on behalf of the patrons and trying to sort out issues. It relies a lot on relationships with other bodies. So, for instance, the INTO, officials within the INTO, an issue arises. Now, there are formal procedures and everything else, but sometimes you can just sort it out with the application of that most dangerous of things, common sense, and relying on good working relations with other people. And occasionally, yes, I have to give a gentle rap across the knuckles to a board, and the INTO have to give a gentle correction to one of their members, and we get everything sorted out. Other times then, informally, the INTO, myself, have gone to the department and managed to sort out issues for like individual teachers. And there is that cooperation there between the bodies, right? So sometimes myself and the INTO can be opposite sides of the table. Sometimes we can work together to resolve things. And the aim generally is to try and work on some kind of partnership model to actually address issues as they arise. So not just the general policy stuff, but sometimes the nitty-gritty of dealing with an actual flesh and blood individual and trying to address their thing. Similarly, the patrons regularly are drawn into different issues within the schools, sometimes more, sometimes less, and they have to, be addressed as well. That's everything from neighbours, people living beside schools, to parents within the schools, to staff within the schools, that kind of thing. But a large part of it is that now, I mean, there was a recent podcast there, one of the more popular podcasts in Irish education, that was kind of giving out about the amount of bodies involved in education. And when you talked about education partners meeting, we hear that now with COVID, the education partners are meeting once a week. The partnership there can sometimes feel a bit almost like it's a box ticking exercise. The department bring everybody in, let them have their say, and then do what they're going to do anyway. But that's a little overly cynical. There is feedback loops there. So you have the managing bodies, the trade unions, there's other, what do you call it? The podcast, I think, managed to list 30-something bodies that are consulted by the department as part of the partnership approach.
Sorry, Alan, could you just even tell, that sounds like a good resource for students even. What's the name of that podcast?
I couldn't dare publicize it. I know, it's the Simon, what do you call it? It's Simon Lewis's podcast.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, so I think it's on Shaw, isn't it? On Shaw, yeah. You'll find it.
Yeah, he has a presence on Twitter. He's very
very present on Twitter. Yeah, he's a principal in Educate Together School. No, I was recently actually got into an engagement.
I actually know him. I met his partner and all. Yeah. They're very good, in fairness. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I got into an engagement with him, funny enough, about those partnerships meetings, because he was talking about Catholic patrons being one of the partners. And I just said, no, actually, the Catholic patrons are the only patron voice not represented at the partnership table, even though we constitute 90% of the schools.
Sorry, just rephrase this. Would you say that again, Alan? Because I think that's a really big point, because we have this idea of the Catholic having this power to manipulate the system. So you're saying so the Catholic schools are the only, so the Catholic patrons, so the bishops basically, are the only patron involved in Education Ireland that aren't included in the partnership
yes. Now, CPA, you see, is important again, and it can be like CPSMA and Miriam would have been part of some of their representational work. They represent the boards of management of the schools and the management function, let's say, within the schools. They don't represent the patron voice.
That's something different.
That's a subtle thing. Different. Now, other patron bodies, you see, so Educate Together is both a patron body and a managing body. And similarly, most of the other, similarly for the Church of Ireland, their patron body and their management body are one and the same thing. The Catholic one we don't have a single patron body, so there's no one to ring. Like there's 24 different Catholic patrons operating within the state. But
And that's
it is interesting that voice is.
That's
Sorry?
just the flag for everyone. There's 26, but 24 within the Republic and 2 are within the North. That's just the flag that just
totally, yeah. We're not actually represented there, but those partnership talks are there. Now, in one sense, you could say, and Simon's view, and there is some legitimacy to it, is it's too big. You need to narrow it down, make the number smaller. But as we've had in this conversation, education is very complex. There's a huge abundance of different stakeholders there, huge bunches of different interests in a sense, all of them legitimate: parents' interest, pupils' interest, teachers through their trade union, the management bodies, those involved in child protection in terms of TUSA, the NCCA, NCSE, right? All these lovely acronyms, as David said, where we're rich in them in education. They all have perspectives. The thing is, what are you arguing for when you're arguing for simplification? Generally, it's to give more and more weight to ultimately the department. You know what I mean? Like if you're simplifying all these things, in many ways,
you're saying give more and more weight to fewer.
Yes.
So like you're actually working. It's actually working against that subsidiarity principle, even.
Yeah.
So because you're actually on about transferring more and more authority and to fewer voices. And
what we do,
you're picking up there. You're picking up there on like by actually amalgamating and trying to bring all these voices together. You have to be careful not to lose out on the uniqueness and subtleties, and that was an issue that was actually had come out for even the establishment of lay Catholic patron bodies for post-primary, because you had all these amalgamations of different school types, and like for be it the Sisters of Charity, Sister of Mercy, Loretta Sister, Presentation Sisters, they're all with their very own unique charism and vision and spirit that now have to try and come together to work under one the Keshtitas.
Yeah.
So how do you have this marriage of vision? And the same way there, how do you manage this marriage of interests, I think? And which is interesting just to flag, because we're after going on a little bit, just to reiterate again, that when we talk about all these plethora of interests, the Catholic interest isn't actually represented at that table.
How funny, yeah. No, not the patron side anyway, certainly, yeah.
Yeah,
just to pick up,
because the man... Yeah.
No, Miriam made a very important point, though. Let's say, just to pick one body, the NCCA, the danger is that when you have these national voices that come together with the department, each of those national voices need to be embedded in some kind of feedback, or they need to be getting feedback from the ground. And it's probably more worthwhile to look at how are they actually getting that feedback? How live is it? Okay, so the NCCA, like how much live feedback are they kind of getting from the front line in schools? Are they getting from actual practitioners standing in actual classrooms teaching actual pupils, rather than from people who maybe haven't been involved in a classroom setting for 10 years? You know what I mean?
Yeah. That my experience, and I've been on this, in consultation with them, if you like, I've been representing CPSMA there for a number of years now, and it's something that I would have raised, but I would have a huge concern over their methods of consultation. They talk about gaining rich data and engaging with schools, but in reality, it's all very structured. So if you go on now at the moment and do a questionnaire on, or even your submission for, in the consultation that's ongoing at this time around this revised curriculum, there's specific questions that you answer. So it's very difficult for you, because when you're starting to answer a question, you're thinking about the question. You're not maybe thinking about your own perspective completely, like what you want to say. So it's very difficult to actually get across the point you want to make and consult and give your opinion and your view if you're trying to answer a specific structured set of questions. And any of the seminars they have, they do the same thing. It's very stage managed and structured. And I would have a concern around that.
Yeah. But something else just to pick on the NCCA, but
it's they don't like that. Doesn't like you have the written submission option too, but it can be harder to get rich data, let's just say, from a written submission, because they're not able to do the lovely graphs and statistics around it. Let's say it's a longer, more cumbersome. Yeah,
but even at that, it tends to be to answer certain questions. It's still, there's still a structure, and I understand where they're coming from. I understand they put a lot of work into their research, etc., But I just feel that the vital piece, the most important piece, the most important or the most valuable voice here is the practitioner on the ground. It's the parent on the ground, and it's a broad spectrum, not just those people who have a particular agenda that they want to push. We want to hear from the people who, and encourage people who, who are just getting about their daily life. They're bringing their children to school. They want the best education they can for their children, but they don't tend to engage, you see, with a structured piece like this. You have to go on your website. You have to, you have to know what's happening, and it's very difficult to get that. It's not happening as far as I'd be concerned.
I think that's the thing.
Yeah,
like
but
each of those natural voices, and including even the religious education colleges or the education colleges, need to be embedded in what's actually going on the ground. Now I think so. Let's say, for instance, the trade unions. How well are they connected with their members, with the experience of their members? The management body. How in touch are they with the management in schools? Like the quality of connections are really important. And in terms of looking at the partnership approach at that very high. The top level, let's say, in terms of engagement with the department, like how embedded they are. The other thing we haven't talked about is the politicians. We talk about the department, who are the main officials, right? And they constitute quite a significant influence on education, because they're forever. If you know what I mean, the politicians and ministers come and go. But there's politicians sitting out there as well who aren't typically represented at the partnership table either. The minister doesn't typically sit in on those meetings. Nor even does her or his advisor. But we have this whole political class who, funny enough, are also well embedded in their areas. Like TDs are acutely conscious of what wins them votes or loses them votes. But they're out there as well, and they're no more than, I suppose, the Catholic patrons. You don't really hear from them that often, but they're like that web at the top is as complex as the web at the bottom that Miriam started talking about. That web of partnership and relationships at the top of education policy making and setting is a very complicated beast. And I think what we need to do in education is to make sure the quality of connections between the centre and the periphery. We need to look at how strong those connections are, because that's what's critical. There's too much abstraction, I think, in policy making. In terms of it.
And I think we're still trying to deal with the outcomes we're still trying to deal as well with the impact that Minister Rory Quinn's tenure had on education in Ireland as well. In the sense that kind of everything got thrown up into the air and is still landing. So I often describe it like as if the education system in Ireland is like someone who had a midlife crisis now, and kind of is after coming out the other side of it, and it's kind of going, God, I have to try and put the pieces of my life back together now, Yeah. And it's that kind of thing there. But I think it's so. The reason why the education system that is so complex, because it is about all the relationships, and that there is that butterfly effect throughout the system, be it from the ground up or from the top down. And I think just even if anybody can take away from this conversation, and just even this chance, really been brilliant, guys. And thanks a million for giving me so much of your time as well. This is just conversations and information that students are really privileged to get at this stage of their teaching careers. Is that if you go in there as a teacher into a school thinking that, I am the authority, forget about it. It's not going to,
I was just thinking if I could give a kind of a words of wisdom, and I'm not saying I'm wise, I'm battered and bruised from what I would say is, it is all about relationships. Okay. It's everything they do, but they have to be open to those relationships. And you're in college and you're learning how to plan and deliver a lesson and teach. But ultimately, it's about the relationship you have with your pupils, with your fellow staff, with your parents. You're not going to be skilled at those relationships day one. You have to allow yourself time to develop the skills to be able to engage in those relationships and get the most out of them. So give yourself that space. Allow yourself, be open to those relationships. Just because a parent is coming in, giving out, don't take it personally. They may have a misconception about something that has gone on. Don't let that knock your confidence or stop you allowing yourself having those relationships. because all it does is makes you more skilled so that the next time you're better able to cope with a situation like that. So, be open to those. Give yourself time to develop those skills.
That's brilliant. That they are definitely the best words of advice I've heard anyway, as in to go, because it's like, and I think it's just about realizing that you're stepping into like it's like a third wheel. Like, so in some ways, like the student coming into school on placement, it's like a third wheel coming along with someone on a date. So, and they're trying to hop in, and they're kind of the school already has its own thing going on. It's just getting on with life, and things are going on swell. And then suddenly, hi, I'm over here. I was like, can I come in on this? So, and they're thrown into the mix, and then they're kind of dumped fairly quick. So they're like, I don't like this whole. So you're annoying me. Go home. I'm happier with just the two of us. That's the kind of situation. Because I'll come back when you're more equipped. So, and I suppose you're stepping out into a world of ongoing relationships. So you have to figure out where, how those relationships work with you, and what's the ebb and flow going along. But I think there has been a nervousness traditionally in Irish education to engage with parents. I think that's a systemic thing, kind of way, like even at local level. Do you know what I mean? And because let's face it, lads, relationships are hard, so they give a lot of headaches. So like the sooner you can, so if you're trying to streamline that and you're trying to make less headaches, but that's not really going to be the most beneficial then, in some ways either.
You will actually develop skills, and my advice is listen more than you speak. That's to me, that's a core skill in that, so. And this goes with with colleagues, with inspectors, with all of the different agencies that you'll engage with. It's be prepared to listen, be open to listen.
Yeah, because you even have the DA as well. You'll be getting visits from the DA, even from the patron side, as well. Like, so, like you have a marriage of relationships that you're trying to come to grips with. I'm just conscious that we've covered an awful lot in this conversation. So, I think I'd love to have you back another time to talk maybe about another topic, which would be brilliant. And so, just because that's your wellsprings of information, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope the students really enjoy it too. So, I think just on that point, I think just to remain open, listen, is a really, really good point, I think, for us to even end this conversation on really, we're saying partnership, but we're talking relationship. And I think about what is a good relationship, and two sides to that story, and it's very complicated within the education space. So thanks very much, Miriam and Alan, for joining me today.
No.
Thanks very much.